So, welcome to the final episode in SPSS 3. Where I'm going to cover the last part of the chi-square test of independence from Chapter 16. I'll be going over the specific assignment that you're required to turn in. And so just to kind of go back to the first part of the Chapter 16 overview, the objective, recall, of a chi-square test of independence is to determine if there's a relationship between two categorical variables. There's certain requirements for the data, namely that you've got two categorical variables with two or more levels each, and that the data consists of counts of the number of individuals that are in each unique group. And finally, there's two main assumptions, which is pretty good for most of our statistical tests. The only assumptions are that there's independence of observations, which would mean that you have each individual can only be in one of the cells that are within the grid that you set up with the frequencies. So each individual is in only one group, and that our frequencies are 5 or greater in each one of our cells. You can actually perform Fisher's test if you have cells that have less than 5, but in the case of this example, that's not going to happen. So anyway, just for future reference. So looking at the problem that's outlined in the assignment, we've got an elementary education director, and they were interested in looking at performance of students who participated in pre-K later on once they were in kindergarten. And basically the idea was that this person wanted to find out if pre-K really had an effect on student performance in kindergarten. Of course, we can't demonstrate an effect entirely, but we could take a look at the data and see if there might be a difference between kids that participated in pre-K and similar students who didn't participate in pre-K. So looking at the second paragraph here, it says students must meet certain criteria for pre-K, including qualifying for free or reduced lunch, being classified as an English learner, or being homeless. There may be new ones out there, but at the time, those were the ones that were considered. And then the director collected data from an end of kindergarten reading screener that classified students as either reading below grade level or at grade level or above. So they had some reading data from the end of kindergarten. So what the director did was then looked at all this information, took all the students who were in kindergarten and looked at their English language status, their lunch status, homeless status, and then whether or not they participated in pre-K. And so this person took all students who met at least one of those criteria and then looked at their pre-K participation status and their reading scores at the end of kindergarten. So the data is presented in table 1 in the assignment, and so here you can see what that looks like. And I've got the name of the title of the table 1. Here's the title here: reading levels of kindergarten students based on participation in kindergarten. This is APA format, so you should really start to recognize what correct formatting for these tables are. Note that there's a line above and that there's a line below. There's also a place for a note down here at the bottom stating that all the students included in this analysis met one or more of criteria for participation in pre-K. So that's kind of the background on that. So again, this is kind of APA formatted. So across the top here, you can see we have the reading level at the end of kindergarten. Either students were reading below grade level or they were reading on grade level or above. And then over here on the left-hand side, we've got their pre-K participation, either no or yes, they didn't participate in pre-K, or yes, they did. Okay, so here's our data set. So hopefully this looks familiar to you from the previous assignment or previous video and the example in Yaki. So I set it up in a very similar way. So now you can see hopefully that we would take a frequencies approach rather than an individual observation approach here to putting this data into SPSS, which is what I'm going to ask you to do. So here's just kind of reformatted using the same kind of layout that we had for the example from Yaki in chapter 16 with introvert, extrovert, amusement park versus retreat, that that whole thing, but now it has these data set up in the same way, where we got reading level at the end of K, below or at or above, and then pre-K participation, no and yes, and here's our data. So what I ask you to do in the assignment is to enter these data into SPSS and perform the chi-square test of independence. You'll need to create variables and enter data into an empty data frame, and then save a copy of the data file you created. All right, so that's what I'm going to ask you to do, and then there'll be some questions. So just looking back again at the example, when you go to set this up, the frequency approach to this in SPSS, you've got three variables. Okay, so in that example, we had our personality, introvert versus extrovert, activity, amusement park versus a retreat, and then we had the frequencies here. So what you're going to need to do is to take this data from here and sort of revisualize it in terms of what it would look like in SPSS. So instead of personality, you would have reading level at the end of K. Instead of activity, you would have pre-K participation. Then frequency, that can stay the same. Of course, your data are going to be different, but I'm just trying to help you to visualize what that might look like. Okay, then I'm going to ask you to respond to some items. So let me go over to SPSS and just kind of go through the process of how you'd set this up. So you'll go ahead and launch SPSS, and you'll get a blank data frame there, so you can start putting things in. We need to first set up our variables. So I'll flip over to the variable view tab, and I'll put our variables in there. So the first thing that we're going to need is the, let's say, reading level. Okay, so there's a reading level at, I'll put K at the end of K. Okay, then the other thing that we're going to need is the, did they participate in pre-K? So I'll just call that pre-K. Okay, and then the last one was frequency, so we'll need that variable as well. Now we'll have to identify the types of variables that these are. So over here under measure for reading level at kindergarten, I'll need to put that as nominal because it's categorical variable. And same thing with pre-K. And then frequency, we're going to set that as scale because that's a numeric kind of variable. We can reduce these decimals down to 2 or to 0 if you want to, but that's really about all of the information that we need to include there. So then now when we go over to our data view, we can see that we've got our reading levels and our pre-K and our frequency are there. So let me just kind of move this out of the way so that we can also take a look at this data table here. Clean this up just a little bit for us so we can see it side by side. So here's our SPSS. Over here is the data that we need to put in. So reading level at kindergarten, there's two possibilities. Either they were below or at or above. Now we're going to need to code this as ones and zeros and ones. All right. So under variable view again, I'm going to go to reading level for kindergarten. Okay, and I'm going to assign values. Okay, I'm going to say a 0 in this field is equal to below grade level. Okay, so these students were reading below grade level. And then if it's a 1, I'm going to label that at or above. Okay, so those are two. We can click OK. All right, so same thing now with our pre-K participation. I've got no and yes, so I can just use 0 for no and 1 for yes. So if I go back here, oh, didn't want to do that. So here a value of 0 is going to be no pre-K. Add that, and a 1 is yes pre-K. Okay. So that's a 1. All right. So now I've got those labeled. Now we're not going to do that for frequency because we've got numeric data for that variable. As you recall from over here, we had this scale So nominal, you want to code it and set what the values are for each of those codes, as we learned in the first SPSS assignment. All right, so going back to data view now, okay, I'm going to set my levels of reading level and pre-K. So I've got a 0 for reading level, okay, and that means below. And then for pre-K, I can put in a 0, and that means no participation in pre-K. So I can go ahead and complete the frequency, which is going to be this number right here, because these are students who are reading below at the end of kindergarten, and then they did not participate in pre-K. So over here, I'll type in my 115. All right, so looking now at reading below grade level, 0, and participating in pre-K, which is 1, I'll put in that frequency. So below grade level, which is a 0 for reading level, and then a 1 for participation. My frequency is 138, as you can see in the cell here. All right, so then repeating that for this column at or above, we're going to call those ones. So I can put ones on both of those. And then this 87 represents no pre-K. So over here in SPSS, I'm going to code that as a 0. And then down here for pre-K participation, I'm going to put that as a 1, because these 153 students were reading at or above grade level and participated in pre-K. So then I'll complete this by typing in 87 for the frequency and 153 there. Okay, so then you would go in and actually perform your analysis. And just to help you to remember how to do that, you're going to go to Analyze, and you're going to select cross tabs. All right, and then your rows, if we look back over here, recall that our rows were um, pre-K participation, so we're going to put that in the rows. And then reading level, I'm going to put that in the columns. Then I'll go in and I'll choose the chi-square statistics, phi and Kramer's V there. Let's see, I don't think there was anything else, so we can do that. And then we can go ahead and we can run our analysis and get our output from that. Now, I'm going to leave the interpretation of the analysis up to you, because you're going to be required to go in and sort of figure out what's going on there and answer some questions about that. So going back to the PowerPoint presentation, um, here are the things I'm going to ask you. Write a research question for this scenario. So use the example from Yaki to help you to come up with that. But of course, obviously, you're going to need to use the variables from this particular scenario about pre-K participation and um, uh, reading level at the end of kinder. And then null and alternative hypotheses. Again, use Yaki as your guide for that. Talk about the assumptions. Did it meet the assumptions? Remember, there were two of those. Explain how you know that. So don't just say yes, but tell me why each of those assumptions you knew were met. And then you're going to write up the results using APA format. Again, use Yaki as a guide and our other sort of rules for writing up things in APA format, recalling how Yaki may not be doing that entirely properly according to the newest version of APA. And then you're going to turn in two things. You're going to give me the data file that you created, the .sav file, and also the output file from the analysis. So make sure you save those and that you turn those in along with the assignments, or you can copy and paste the information out of the data file or the output file and just paste that into the Word document if you so choose. That's fine. Otherwise, good luck with the assignment. I know it's kind of long, but I've tried to narrow these down quite a bit actually over the years so that you don't have quite an onerous of a task. But I think it's important for you to walk through the process so that you can really understand, number one, how SPSS works if you should get to the point in your treatise to actually perform your own data analysis. And then the other part is to understand what types of analyses might be used for certain situations that you might run across. In this case, you've got two categorical variables and how you would investigate whether there's a relationship between them.